you know, you got a space for that, or you got space for theme at the end of a scene, you know, and finally she's sitting on my lap.
Don't talk, bitch. If you want more Draft Zero more often, please consider joining our wonderful cohort of Patreons.
However, this episode in particular is brought to you by ScriptUp.
Now, regular listeners know that ScriptUp are story consultants with industry expertise. They don't promise any of that access to market bullshit. They just help you make your script better via their excellent report and a follow-up feedback call.
And that feedback call is super valuable. If you're like me and you think with your mouth open, you know that often discussing ideas is how you find solutions to problems.
We've used ScriptUp and they were super helpful for our project.
And we've also heard from listeners who sing their praises, that say that their written analysis is really thoughtful and considered, but that the follow-up call really does help, that it helps them diagnose things that are unseen and also helps them spitball possible solutions in a really creative environment.
But the best news we've heard recently for Stu and my ego, and also hopefully for your ego, dear listeners, is that ScriptUp has told us that when they get a script from a Draft Zero listener, those scripts are a cut above. This means that you, dear listener, must be a better writer just because you love listening to 3-hour podcasts about screenwriting. Jokes aside, I think having a shared passion for the screenwriting craft, and that's why we're all here, is awesome.
Ego stroking aside, if you would like 10% off ScriptUp's story consultancy services, please use the promo code DZ10, and you can find the links and the promo code in our show notes.
And now for Front Matter.
Isn't this the front matter?
Hi, I'm Chaz Fisher.
And I'm Stu Willis.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast where two Australian filmmakers try to work out what makes great screenplays and scenes work.
And in this episode, we are talking about scene questions, or questions that the audience ask when watching a scene, I guess. I mean, that's very broad.
I guess this is a narrowing of focus from when we did sequence level questions with Stephen Cleary. And he had broadly broken the types of narrative, for lack of a better word, questions that writers and filmmakers can prompt in an audience. And he broadly broke them down as plot questions, character questions, and thematic questions. And then there's like, it's not, you know, they're not mutually exclusive in that we looked at how the drama of The Bourne Identity, you know, some of those tensions of the scenes, like the plot elements of them were brought out by introducing character questions within those broader sequences. But now we're wanting to look at, in particular, how this tool could be applied to make individual scenes stronger. And as always, this is a rewriting tool. So, Stu, fire away.
Yeah, it is definitely a rewriting tool. I think it can be a writing tool on some level because it's about being aware of what an audience's experience of a scene is. Now, when you're in but I say it can be a writing tool. It definitely feels more like rewriting because I think we're probably similar. And other writers, you know, if you're in the flow, I tend to not be thinking about the audience's experience.
Yeah.
Like there are moments I definitely conceive of point of view shifts, or particularly like, oh, I want to start on this and come to here and, you know, to create tension and stuff like that. But it's usually on subsequent passes that I'm more consciously thinking about what the audience's experience of the film is. And questions here, as you said, and I love the word prompted in the audience. But before we get into what we mean by that, I want to start with something that seems basic but isn't.
Okay.
But what do you think a scene is, Chaz?
Okay. So I think it's very different in theater than in film, and I'm happy to have an argument there. But obviously, it's a unit of story. You know, like my kids keep asking me, "What's smaller than atoms?" And you know, we get into subatomic particles, and then we get into shit that I don't understand, and I just throw out the word quarks and quantum and hope that they go away.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
I think it's a unit of storytelling. So you know, something that has ostensibly a beginning, middle, and end. The reason why I think it's different in film and theater is I think scenes in film are more location oriented. Like, you know, something that takes place in a location is often a scene, but I think we'll probably both agree that you can have multiple scenes within the same location without leaving that location. And the reason I think it's different in theater is obviously it's hard to change location in theater. So usually it's to do with like all the characters leaving, or certainly some characters leaving.
The term that I've heard and is for that is French scene. So the idea is that you have, character A and B in a scene, character B leaves, character C comes in, A and C talk, B comes back, it's A, B, and C, and then B and C stay, or whatever. The configuration of characters is a French scene, and it changes the scene. I was thinking about that. I agree it's a discrete unit of storytelling, and I agree it's like the atom of storytelling. Like beats are like the subatomic particles, I guess, and in individual frames, I guess, are like the quarks. But I think there is something I picked up from theatre, which I actually think is really useful in terms of screenwriting, which is there's the classical unities, and despite the name, they're not from the classical period. That's kind of the idea of the French well-made play, I think, is where they came from, about 1900. And the idea is that in a play, you have unity of space, unity of time, and unity of action. And I actually think that is a really good understanding of what a scene is that a scene, like it's a spectrum. And at some point I'll talk about these unities in terms of like unity of form and other stuff. But unity of time, unity of space, unity of action, most scenes have those, 3 of them. Sometimes montages kind of have 2, right?
I mean, montage almost by definition is a collection of
moments,
different scenes, even though they might be.
But I think in terms of, but as a unit of storytelling, right?
Yeah,
it definitely has unity of action, and I think then the question is like, what do we mean by action? And I think action for me then is kind of like character action. That there's a unity of a character's action. That they, coming back to the Mamet thing, which we've talked about before, is a character turns up with a pressing need to be in the scene, right? They've got a, like classical, like, a character wants something. They have an intention. That's why they begin the scene. And that is the unity of action. And when that action is complete, right, or thwarted, you kind of get a new scene, right?
Well, I agree with you, but I also think this is kind of going to be like a gut feel sort of idea, because I think, you can definitely have single scenes where by the end of the scene, all the characters have changed in terms of entering or exiting, and it will still be the same scene.
So I think it'll be the same location, but I think from a dramatic, look, maybe it feels esoteric, but I think you could probably look at the examples that we're going to run through today. When you have a shift of characters, right, that actually becomes like dramatically it's a different scene, but it feels like it's got flow because you've got unity of time and you've got unity of space, but you don't necessarily have unity of action. You change the action.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, but it feels connected because it's got that unifying force of, and look, that might be not something that's very useful for you as a writer in terms of like, cool, that's great definition of scene, guys, but what does that have to do with questions? So I think it does relate to the stuff that we're talking about though, in terms of questions.
Because broadly, while you and I think we're quite structure oriented in our storytelling approaches, and definitely like Draft Zero bears that out. But I also am an adherent of a gripping story just needs to be like a collection of scenes where you never lose interest, right?
Yeah, there's a quote, I think it's from Besson, I should look it up, which is like, all you need is 3 good scenes and no bad ones.
Yeah, and so I think there are writers out there who are more like less intellectualizing or rationalizing their work and more going by gut instinct, and then scenes might be even more crucially important to them, because just so long as the reader and then subsequently the viewer is engaged scene by scene, then you should be fine, and then maybe structure just comes back to the overall feeling you want the audience to leave with. But bringing this back to questions, it is possible that the questions being asked and answered within a scene is actually possibly the best way to define when a scene begins and ends, because I feel like this will get released sufficiently in the future that we won't get slammed for spoilers. But in Succession, no, I'm going to back it up. Okay, there's a very dramatic scene where it starts with just 2 characters on the phone to another character. And at some point during that scene, one of the characters leaves to go and get a third character and bring them back into the scene. And they're handing the phone from character to character, so that there's lots of different interactions between usually just two characters, and there's as many as 4 or 5 within the quote unquote scene, but it still all feels like it is one scene, because there's many character questions being raised throughout that scene, like what is the impact of the event on each of these characters. Those are character questions, but there's an overriding single plot question for the whole scene, which makes all of this coming and going still feel like one scene. But
it probably has unity of action.
To your point, it has unity of time, and it has unity of space, and it has unity of action.
Yeah. So I think and that feels like, as I said, that feels like, oh, cool, that's an analysis tool, but it relates to the question. And coming back to the idea that there are writers out there that would just be writing from a place of character and this kind of structural stuff, is I think part of it is the very simple, okay, let's start with what is a plot question. A plot question to me, and you can go and listen to the sequence episode, is generally something like, will they stop the bomb in time? It's something related to physical action that the characters can take with a very clear, often yes or no answer. Like it should be that clear. And the thing is, when a character turns up to a scene with a want, if they want something, that is usually the plot question. Will they get what they want?
Also, the big thing that to me distinguishes plot questions from other questions is they're very easily dramatizable. Like you can see the answer on screen, whether in dialogue or something visual, whereas character questions it's much harder to portray a clear answer to a character question without getting super cheesy, because it's a question like it's an internalized question.
Well, when will Chaz and Stu realize that Chaz is indeed Tom and Stu is indeed Greg?
That is incorrect.
I haven't even watched the show. I just realized from everyone else's agitation over that characterization is
that you are definitely Tom and I am definitely Greg.
Yeah. You're just Greg who doesn't do the work. I'm just scratch out. Okay. So the character comes in with a want, and then the plot is over. The scene is over when they kind of get what they want, or they don't, or they kind of get an answer that leads them into a new direction, right? Now, that I think is actually related to point of view. So if you've got something that really is strict with audience character and audience being aligned, that is really easy. Right? And that means ideally we know what the character wants. And suspense in the scene is about whether or not they will get it. So I think part of the reason of thinking about this stuff in terms of questions is you're really talking about the basic suspense of a story. You've got enough information to ask a question, right? Which is, will this character get what they want? That seems easy, but the audience actually have to have the information to understand what the character wants. And then when it's answered, they have to get enough information to understand that the question has been answered in whatever form it is, right?
So we're kind of, as always, heading back somewhat to narrative point of view, because at any scene level, if you're just talking about the character knows what they want all the time, right?
Yeah.
The question is, how much does the audience know? And I guess like taking this esoteric stuff and trying to render it to the practical, like nearly every piece of screenwriting guidance, and you and I are about to go through this, is like, come into the scene late and leave as early as you can, right? But then how do you define what is late and early? And I think it will largely be defined by when the audience is aware of the question being posed and subsequently answered within the scene.
Yeah. Using POV as an example of what we mean by that, to use the Hitchcock example, you got the suspense is when you see a ticking bomb under a table and then you see characters talking. That is a question that the audience asks that the characters are unaware of. Right. So when the question becomes, when will they realize that there's a bomb under the table? And when they discover the bomb, that answers the question. And then you answer ask a new question is, will they be able to defuse it, or will they be able to escape? The absence of that bomb, if we just have the characters talking and then a bomb explodes, it's not just surprise. It has no suspense. It has no plot question at all. So thinking about your audience point of view can help you make questions happen. If you've got a scene that is feeling a little bit loosey-goosey, a little bit like not enough pressure on it, then maybe it's because you need to reconfigure your order of events so the audience asks the questions before you go into that scene.
Or different kinds of questions. But it's also why Rashomon effect works, right? Because when you're revisiting, even, you're coming back to revisit the same story elements, like the same plot developments, but from a different perspective. But the audience has more information than the characters in watching that scene, so that you can then ask different questions.
Yeah, so I reckon that the structure that we're kind of talking about is that there is a moment when the question is raised. Sometimes this is in the scene. Sometimes it's the kind of the question it becomes as a response as the end of a previous scene, right? So the end of the scene raises a question, And I think there's kind of this exploration of the question, which is a very vague term, and I think that's okay. And then you kind of get this kind of like I think maybe in Scene Showdowns, we're talking about it, but there's like a midpoint, often like a turn in the middle of the scene, not always. And then there is an answering of the question. And often the answering of the question raises a new question. And that's the flowing of question and answer is what kind of builds plot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think when we get to the examples, it will be easier to pass, but also because I've got some questions, around like whether you can have a scene that doesn't have any questions for the audience at all. Like, is there a scene where the audience is just sitting back, not actively engaging in trying to answer a question?
Right. And look, to give you a clear example of a question and answer in a scene and how it uses to structure a scene, I want to play something from the TV series of Loki, right? Now, the excerpts that we're going to play today, you're going to obviously hear, but it may be better to watch them. And we're posting clips on our Patreon as public posts, so you don't have to sign up to Patreon, but please consider, on our Twitter and our Instagram. So links will be in our show notes so you can see the clips as we post them. Cross fingers, no copyright holds. This is educational purposes, right?
Yeah.
So in Loki season 1, episode 3, Loki and Sylvie crash land on a planet. I think it's called Lamentus 1, right? And basically the whole episode, the central dramatic question of the episode is, will they get off the planet, right? And that's a very clear plot question because the answer is either yes or no. Yeah. But within the plotting of that there's a series of basically, like, I guess you could call them mini goals. And this leads them to a scene. Their first thing is like, oh, let's go and see there's someone with power up on that over there yonder. Let's
because they need the initial plot question is our device for getting us out of here needs power. So where can we find a power source? Is the question being raised.
The very kind of like the mission that they have to achieve. Yeah. And so they go and then trundle off to this house, and this is what happens.
What do you devils want with me?
We just want to ask you a question. Where is everyone?
The Ark. The evacuation vessel.
Something like that would have enough juice to repower the Tempad.
How do we get there?
Train station's the edge of town. But you'll never get a ticket.
We now cut to a wide shot of this space train station with refugees lined up trying to get onto the space train. And we find Loki and Sylvie making their way to the entrance.
The Ark leaves tonight, and we've been waiting in line for hours.
Well, this looks fun.
Come on.
We can't fight over to that train.
Who said anything about fighting?
All your plans involve fighting.
Not this one. I'm going to enchant a guard, have him lead us through the crowd, and if anyone gives us any trouble...
Make him start shooting? And then what? Kill every guard and hijack the train?
Whether or not there's a fight is entirely up to them.
We're doing this one my way. How do we look?
Like someone with a shit plan.
It's a great plan. Just follow my lead.
Loki casts an illusion on himself to make himself look like a guard, and he escorts Sylvie, as if she's a prisoner, up to the front of the line.
Whoa, hey.
Taking this one to Sharu.
Okay. And the tickets?
Orders come from the top to get her on this train.
Sir, this...
Sylvie touches the guard on the shoulder and takes control of him.
Everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. Yeah, I just remembered that headquarters radioed in the request for them this morning.
Okay.
Okay.
Like, literally, they ask the question, they are thwarted, they are, to again quote David Mamet, educated that another way exists. Like the character, you need to do this. And then you see them going down to try to get on the train, and the question is, will they get on the train? Right? And the answer is yes. And then when they're on the train, the new question becomes, will they be caught? And the answer is yes.
Can I see your tickets?
You again? Hello. Tickets. Yes, of course. Here they are. Oops. Still, it looks lovely, doesn't it? Look, is this really necessary? There is a simple explanation. Hey.
But the nice thing about all those sequences is they give you an opportunity. Yes, it keeps the audience engaged because there's, like you said, questions create suspense. The audience is leaning forward, asking and engaging. And, thrillers trade in this all the time. The more plot questions you ask, the more intellectually you are leaning forward. Where what I like about this is that it reveals both Sylvie and Loki's tactics, because Sylvie is a relatively new character at this stage of the show. And then it shows them trying the same tactics again and failing when they're actually caught in the...
Well, you kind of get the midpoint, right? So you have Loki doing his strategy and it fails. And so you get Sylvie, that's the midpoint. And then Sylvie has to take over and then they win. So it's something to think about as well as like the ebb and flow of your characters winning and losing, right?
Yeah.
But the questions here are super clear. Like,
yeah, they're literally vocalized out loud.
And it works. I'm not saying this is the greatest thing ever, but it works and it means people, and this is kind of the point of view stuff where we're super aligned with the character point of view, right? But do you think there's any character questions in this?
If there are, they're very, very minor. There's a few beats of Sylvie not believing Loki will pull this off, and that's ultimately proven to be true, and Loki being kind of arrogant and hubristic, which is like his kind of running condition, I guess. So, but not very, very few. These are nearly all. There's nothing internal. Like if the question raised in the character is, will Loki learn that his confidence in his own abilities is somewhat misplaced? That is not. If it's raised, it's not answered in this scene at all.
And look, if you go back to our sequence episodes, there are questions you raise within a scene that are answered over multiple scenes, right? And it's kind of the nesting of these things that gives you a larger structure. But we're looking at like little scenes. So let's talk character questions. You've suggested 2 examples, the first of which is The Last Crusade, and then we'll do a scene from The Bourne Supremacy. But let's start with The Last Crusade.
Yeah.
Right. And I think what is interesting about this is it's an example of that nesting that we're just talking about, which is there's kind of a plot question, very similar. Instead of like, do we get onto the space train? It's like, can we get onto the Nazi blimp? Same thing, right?
Yeah.
And then they have the moment of Indy, and I've forgotten his dad's name.
Henry Jones.
James Bond. Oh, Henry Jones. You just watch this.
Indy's Jr. Henry Jones Jr. They have the same name. Anyway, yes, I have. Look, this came to mind, right? Because I watched it with my kids the other night, and Stu, you were putting calls out for like very clearly character-driven scenes. And when I was watching the film, it's not the whole sequence that attracted my attention. It was after they've resolved the plot question of will they get on the blimp and will the blimp take off?
Well, we made it.
When we're airborne with Germany behind us, then I'll share that sentiment.
Relax.
And they resolve that when Indy throws the Nazi out of the blimp, and the blimp takes off and sails away. And
Guten Tag, Herr Jones. Schön, mein Herr. Back. Tickets, please. Was?
No ticket.
And then the Dr. Joneses, plural, are sitting. And it's the scene that we've kind of been waiting for the whole movie.
You know, sharing your adventures is an interesting experience.
It's not always shared. It's disgraceful. You're old enough to be her grandfather.
I'm as human as the next man.
I was the next man.
Ships that pass in the night.
You remember the last time we had a quiet drink? Huh? I had a milkshake.
What did we talk about?
We didn't talk. We never talked.
Do I detect a rebuke?
A regret. It was just the two of us, Dad. It was a lonely way to grow up. For you, too. If you'd been an ordinary average father like the other guys' dads, you'd have understood that.
Actually, I was a wonderful father.
When?
Did I ever tell you to eat up, go to bed, wash your ears, do your homework? No, I respected your privacy, and I taught you self-reliance.
What you taught me was that I was less important to you than people who'd been dead for 500 years in another country. And I learned it so well that we've hardly spoken for 20 years.
You left just when you were becoming interesting.
Dad, how can
Well, I'm here now. What do you want to talk about?
I can't think of anything.
Then what are you complaining about? Like we have work to do. When we get to Alexandretta, we will face 3 challenges. First, the breath of God. Only the penitent man will pass. Second, the word of God. Only in the footsteps of God will he proceed. Third, the path of God. Only in the leap from the lion's head will he prove his worth.
What does that mean?
I don't know. We'll find out.
We're turning around. They're taking us back to Germany.
So the question posed by this little scene, and it starts with Indy kind of making an overture to his dad, like basically trying to complain about his parenting, but it actually kind of is articulated after they have an argument about Sean Connery's parenting. But when they both expressed themselves, the question then that Sean Connery asks is, well, here I am. What do you want to talk about? Right? You know, you have access to your father. And I think, I don't know how to articulate this, but maybe the character question being posed by this scene is, will Indy
forgive?
Resolve his issues with his father? Which is a very internalized thing.
And as we talked about in the sequences episode, character questions are often quite like a little bit necessarily more vague. That is almost their defining characteristic against plot questions, is that the character questions are vaguer.
And look, this is an amazing part of, I think, definitely Raiders, and you know, we've used Raiders for exposition here, but the resolution of this character question, where they actually kind of come together as father and son, they then gives them the space of what would 2 eminent archaeologists obsessed with the Grail, although Henry Jones Sr. is a medieval literature professor, not an archaeologist, but what would they actually talk about? And then it allows them to get back into exposition about the Grail journey, because that is what they would genuinely talk about.
And I think what's interesting about this scene, or kind of that nesting structure, is it feels like after they've thrown the Nazi off, right, the plot question of will they get caught isn't like, it's there, but it's not super active. Like, the film isn't drawing attention to it in the same way that in the Loki example, pretty early on, the guards are like, there, that's them, right? In this, the plot doesn't reconnect of like until the very end, the button of the scene. Yeah. So it's almost like it's completely answered this plot question of will they be able to get on the blimp and I was going to say sail away, float away. Yeah. And then it's kind of the plot disappears for a moment, right? The immediate plot question, right? And that gives space for something that is more character orientated.
Well, they could have not had that scene in there,
no,
right? From a story perspective. Right? They could have thrown the Nazi out the window, taken off, and then suddenly, they're turning around. The radio has happened, right? They could have kept the intellectual, the plot-driven questions, us leaning forward, kept the pace up, but they deliberately then slow everything down so that they can have this character.
Yeah. There is a version of this scene where you kind of see someone looking at them and paying attention, and the audience, instead of engaging with the character question, is engaging with they're being watched. They're going to get caught, right? So that's, I guess, what we mean by like the question's there, but it's less about that, and it's more about putting in the moment. I guess maybe that's kind of maybe one of the key things about these scene questions. We're talking about the moment by moment. Like, an audience can have complexities, right, of emotion with the film, but the moment by moment, the filmmaking is telling you, pay attention to this character stuff by literally not shifting our attention to something else and saying, someone's watching them, right? Because we just won't get to enjoy it as much, I guess.
Yeah. And what you can see is, what we're talking about is the control, right, of the writers and filmmakers of the questions that the audience is asking. So they very deliberately in this scene started with tension and plot-driven questions. Will the Joneses escape, right? And then they seemingly resolve that. I know you say, we know from watching the film that, the blimp turns around and the plot kicks back in.
That's what I'm saying. The plot intervenes at the very end, as opposed to it being something that is like under this whole scene. It doesn't play it as tense. Yeah.
But in terms of introducing the character question, they've resolved the plot question. They've got a wide of the blimp sailing away, and then they've got them just sitting, having a drink quietly, not saying anything. It's having to deliberately take a beat to not pose any plot questions. And then Indy, ventures his own internal angst, like, how long has it been since we last had a drink like this?
We're done with Last Crusade. Should we move on to a similar kind of character example in the Bourne Supremacy?
Yeah.
This, again, is another Chaz one. Did you want to kind of give us the context?
Again, like, my way of doing this is like, there are these scenes in films that stand out to me as being like really powerful. And then I go back and go, well, why were they so powerful for me? And this is in the Bourne Supremacy, which is, again, if anything, far more plot driven, like, tension, question, plot question plus question, resolution. Like, it's so intense, right? And this is my favorite of all the Bourne franchise, this second one. But then it's right near the end. It's not the final scene, but Bourne has escaped. They've resolved all the plot questions of, will Bourne survive? Will Bourne escape? He has. He's escaped. And we don't really understand why Bourne was even in this town in the first place. I think is it in Russia or is it in the Ukraine?
Yeah, I was going to ask. From my memory, I rewatched this scene, but I didn't rewatch the whole film. And I was like, do we even know why he's there? Because I've got a feeling that we just know he wants to get there and we don't know what he wants. So one of the questions becomes, why is Bourne there?
Yeah.
That's a very different feeling for the audience.
And they've let that question, it's obviously like there initially when he's arrived, but they replace that question very quickly with, will Bourne survive? Will Bourne get caught? Will he kill the other assassin that's chasing after him? So they resolve all those plot questions. And then we cut to a character whom we've never seen before, right? And it's a young woman. And we know that Bourne has been trying to answer how he ended up in the water. Who was he as an assassin? What was his mission? That's the kind of overriding mystery. But again, these are all dramatizable kind of plot questions. And
before you go on, why don't we listen to the scene? The beginning of the scene is in Russian, so I'm going to read it aloud in English. Quiet. Silence. Okay?
Меня ни денег, ни наркотиков. Вам ведь это нужно?
Don't have any money or drugs. Is that what you want?
Садись.
Sit down. Sit down.
Стул. Возьми стул.
Take the chair.
I speak English.
I'm not gonna hurt you. I won't hurt you. You're older. Older than I thought you'd be. That picture. Does that mean a lot to you?
It's nothing. It's just a picture.
No. It's because you don't know how they died.
I do.
No, you don't. I would want to know. I would want to know that my mother didn't kill my father. That she didn't kill herself.
What?
It's not what happened to your parents. I killed them. I killed them. That was my job. It was my first time. Your father was supposed to be alone. But then your mother came out of nowhere. And I had to change my plan. It changes things. That knowledge, doesn't it? When what you love gets taken from you, you want to know the truth. I'm sorry.
In the scene initially, the way they've chosen to do it, they could have resolved for the audience who this woman is, right? They could have had her walking with a friend and she's talking to each other and they're, talking about her past. She could have been in a psychiatrist's office talking about the trauma of her parents' murder, suicide, or all those things. But the filmmakers have decided to deliberately still have a plot question entering into this scene. Who is this woman? Why are we watching her, right? And then we come in and she's in her kitchen and there's Jason. Oh, sorry.
Do you think who is this person's a plot question? I've got a feeling it's like the fundamental character question.
Possibly.
Like in the same way that all plot questions are like, will they get what they want? Not all questions, but that's kind of like a super question. Like, who is this person is kind of like the super character question.
I think that's fair. I guess the plot question is like, who is this person in relation to Jason Bourne?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, from the way it's structured, I want you to go back to your monologue. But, but when you come into the scene, right?
Yeah.
He's like quiet, silence, okay.
Yeah.
And she's like, and she is terrified of him.
Yeah.
He's sitting on the chair in control of the situation. He's saying, sit down, take the chair. And you're like, what is he up to? Is he going to hurt her? Right? Yeah. And because that's what she is thinking. And the scene actually is played from her point of view. And that maybe is why I'm asking that question of, will he hurt her? Because we are in a follow shot coming in and finding Bourne there. So I think it's done a subtle job. The directing has done a subtle job of make us feel afraid of, is Bourne going to hurt her? Because that is the question that she is asking in that scene herself.
Yeah. But those are plot questions, right? They're very easily dramatizable.
Yeah, I think,
right?
I'm just trying to be like, I agree that they're plot questions. I just think, who is this person isn't necessarily a plot question, but
yeah, I think that's fair.
Who is this person and will they get hurt by Jason? This is a good example of plot character, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. And they've deliberately set it up this way, right? Because they could have been taking these plot questions off the table. Like they want this scene to start with mystery first, right? But they then very quickly kind of try and take mystery off the table. Like he tells her that he's not going to hurt her. He tries to put the gun away to make her feel somewhat safer, but she doesn't. She's having her home invaded by a strange man, right? Who's bleeding. But it's when he asks her about the picture of her family that we as the audience suddenly know definitely who she is.
Yeah.
Right? We know that she is the daughter of the people that he killed. And then the question, by doing that, becomes a lot more internalized.
Yeah.
Right? Because we start asking, why is Jason Bourne doing this? Why was it so important? What does he want from this girl? Why was it so important for him to risk his life to have this conversation with her? And to do that, they've had to remove all these plot questions.
Yeah.
And then it becomes so incredibly powerful because he's just there to tell her that her mother didn't murder her father and that he did not commit suicide. He wants her to not suffer under the illusion of his, his original sin. What he wants is, I guess he wants maybe a measure of forgiveness, but he never asks for it. He doesn't expect to be forgiven. He doesn't try to be forgiven. That's not his tactics here. He's just trying to give something to her.
Well, I think it's also it's not just not his tactics. It's just not his character at this point. And interesting. And look, I'm just going to legitimately raise this question. My gut instinct is a character wanting forgiveness is a good example of a plot character question, as in like wanting forgiveness is something that you can easily dramatize, right? But speaks to character. So it's kind of both. Whereas this makes us ask more questions about Bourne because it is vaguer of why did he do this? What did he want? So
the only reason I think those two scenes leapt out at me when I was watching these very plot heavy films is because they were plot character scenes or even just character scenes. But in both of them, look, this isn't definitive, but the filmmakers have had to work very hard to answer all the plot questions so that then they can pose a character question, to allow that character question to bubble up.
So I reckon you'd find these kinds of scenes. I suppose Last Crusade was one of those kinds of scenes, but particularly something that's more profound. Either when we haven't asked the plot question yet, like at the beginning of the film, or we've answered the central dramatic question at the end of the film. You might also get something like it's going to be like basically those larger structural turning points where a larger sequence question is answered, right? So often you'll get the, kind of spoilers, but not really. Like Dungeons and Dragons has a classic, like the group dealing with all their shit before the final mission, right? Because it's like the sequence question of the previous sequence of getting the doohickey to do the doo-wacky. They've done that, right? And then they have a moment of like character work and then they go and do the final mission. Or you're going to get it at the beginning before the character, before the plot question is raised because isn't the kind of like you either start with a plot question, right? Which can be like Tom Cruise in the back of a SpaceX rocket going to space and like, oh, is the SpaceX rocket going to blow up before Tom Cruise stops it? And the answer is yes. The SpaceX will definitely blow up.
But one of the scenes that you mooted doing was the introduction of in Pulp Fiction of Jules and Vincent Vega. And I think that proves your point, right? Like in that scene, there are some vague plot questions like, where are these people going? Yeah. What are they trying to do? Yeah. Right. But those are really, those questions are posed, I feel like once they're in when there's a change of location, when they're from the car and they're actually in the corridor walking towards, they're still having, discussions around foot massages, but then the dramatization of it, the fact that they're now walking to a door is prompting the audience to go, well, what's behind the door? Where are these people going? But that initial scene in the car, I think you're right. That is pure character. Who are these people? There might be a little bit of why are we watching them, but which is, heading a little bit towards pushing the audience back into more thematic questions, more being aware of the storytelling and what it's trying to do on them. But I think you're right. Before when characters are being introduced, before a plot question is raised, then you are asking pure character questions.
So do you think we should do the kind of, there's like two scenes back to, like, I would argue that there are two scenes in the opening of Queen and Slim. So Queen and Slim opens with two characters on a date, and a date's a great opening because aren't dates just asking and answering character questions about each other?
Yeah.
On some level, right?
Yeah.
And they're in their car going home, and there is a plot question on some level, which one of the characters vocalizes, which is, are you going to come home with me?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think it's the other way. Like, do you think you're going to come home and have sex with me?
Yeah. Am I going to get lucky? The answer is no. Right? But that is the question that structures that scene. And it's a good example of plot character question because, again, it is something that is clearly dramatizable, but it speaks to character.
You really shouldn't text and drive.
Ain't nobody texting. I'm making sure I don't get lost.
I could tell you how to get to my house.
Give me my phone.
Relax. I'm gonna give it back.
She gonna tell me where to turn?
Yeah, just...
Oh, so now you're gonna point the directions.
I'm telling you where to go. You made a playlist? That's cute.
Don't go through my phone.
Did you like In a Sentimental Mood before or after Love Jones?
I knew about that shit way before Love Jones.
Don't lie.
Okay, I fuck with it more after I saw the movie.
I appreciate your honesty.
So what happens tonight?
You're gonna drop me off and then you'll go home, I guess.
Oh.
Did you think we were gonna have sex?
Nah. No.
Wow.
I thought we were gonna hang out. Maybe get to know each other.
Nah, I'm good.
Like her answer there is reflective of her character, but something that we can easily dramatize. But there is a French scene change, the addition of another character. And this becomes the inciting incident of this film, for those who haven't seen it, right? And it's mild spoilers, but it happens like less than 10 minutes into the film, is that they're pulled over by a police officer.
Nah, I'm good.
Slim takes his phone back from Queen, causing him to swerve a bit. Then he switches lane without signalling. Just as he picks up speed, he hears a horrifying sound. Whoop, whoop. Every black person's worst nightmare.
Do you have any warrants?
Really?
Do you?
Nah, I ain't got no warrants.
Do you have any weapons in the car? Any narcotics?
I got a pocket knife in the glove compartment.
That's fine.
I know it is.
Turn the radio down.
your hand down.
He only had it up because you're shining a light in his eyes.
I'm just trying to see inside the vehicle.
It's just us.
License registration.
I'm grabbing my wallet.
I can see that.
Well, y'all like to shoot first and ask questions later, so.
You got something you want to say to me?
No, I don't.
You know why I stopped you tonight?
No, sir.
Failed to execute a turn signal back there. You're swerving a little bit, too.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah, it is. .1104 dispatch.
What do you got?
2 occupants. Driver's black male, passenger black female. They're in a white Honda Accord. License Trust God. Operator failed to execute a turn signal. He's driving erratically. Possible DUI. Over.
Do you need backup?
Negative. Go ahead and ask you to step out of the vehicle for me.
Can I ask why, officer?
No, you may not. Step out of the car. Let's go, man. Back bumper right there, hands on the hood. I'll ask you one time, you got anything on you I need to know about?
No, sir.
Illegal substances?
No, sir.
What about in the vehicle?
No, sir.
You drinking tonight?
No,
Why is that funny?
because I don't drink.
You do me a favor, pop the trunk.
Why?
Because I asked you to.
Ain't nothing in there but shoeboxes.
Let's see him. Right there. May I help you?
Do you have a warrant?
Ma'am, he's already agreed to the search. I don't need a warrant. It's in the boxes.
Shoes.
You mind if I take a look?
That's fine. Would you please hurry up?
What did you say?
It's just cold.
At this point, the officer draws his sidearm and points it directly at Slim.
Put your hands on your head and get on the ground now.
Are you serious?
Get on the fucking ground! Get on the fucking ground!
Why is he under arrest?
Get back in the car, you're going to jail too!
I am an attorney, and I demand to know why this man is under arrest.
Sir, we don't have to do
Why
this,
is he
sir.
under arrest? What is your
Get
name?
back in the car!
What is your badge number?
I'm not gonna tell you! Get back in the fucking car!
Get back in the car. Get back in
Why
the car.
is he
We got
under
this.
arrest?
Sir, we don't have to.
What
sir,
is your
sir,
badge number?
Sir, it was a turn signal. I ain't done nothing wrong. It's
I'm reaching for my cell phone.
Keep your hands
I
where I
have
can
the
see
right
him.
to record this arrest.
Keep your hands where I can see him!
I'm reaching for my cell phone.
She collapses to the ground and hits her head on the pavement. Slim screams for her. He tries to run towards her, but Officer Reed grabs him by the shoulders and slams him on the ground. Officer Reed and Slim roll around on the ground for a few seconds until Officer Reed finally pins Slim to the ground and points the gun at his face. Don't move. Officer Reed sees Queen trying to get up. He points his gun at her again. While the officer's attention is diverted, Slim knocks the firearm out of his hand. When the gun goes flying, Officer Reed reaches for it, but Slim's get to it first. When Slim turns around, he sees Officer Reed lunging towards him. Slim fires the gun. Boom! He shoots Officer Reed in the neck, killing him instantly. Slim drops the gun and stops breathing. Queen muffles her own scream. Officer Reed's lifeless body lies on the pavement. Queen applies pressure to her fresh wound and winces in pain. Slim gets up and runs to her side. He sees the blood running down her leg.
You good? Huh? You okay? Let's go. We can't just leave him here.
Yes, we can. Now let's go. Come on!
You haven't worked out from the audio example. There are two black people in the car. It's a white police officer pulling them over. One of them, as we will learn, Queen, is a lawyer, right? So she is definitely aware of the rights in this situation. But the situation turns very bad very quickly. And I think the plot question starts at the beginning of the scene, is raised by this beginning of scene by the characters, the reaction of the characters, right? Which is that Queen, as soon as they hear that sound, which the script describes as whoop whoop, every black person's worst nightmare, right? That's what the script says, but to really make us experiences as an audience, which is Queen starts interrogating Slim. Do you have any warrants? Do you? She starts asking questions about him. She is worried. Yeah. And then she even says under her breath, well, you all like to shoot first and ask questions later. Queen's concern of will we survive this traffic stop is actually the plot question of this scene. And then that plot question is escalated by a midpoint shift in the script that really escalates the situation, which is obviously, which is when the police officer draws his gun, but it's in response to Slim saying, can you please hurry up? I'm cold, right? And then that is kind of made even worse by Queen getting out of the car.
Yeah.
Right?
Or just to, like, first of all, I was interested why you raised this as an example as being a quote-unquote plot character scene, because it feels very plotty as soon as the cop arrives, right? Like, there's just this tension in the air. Will they survive this traffic stop? Will it escalate? Will something go horribly wrong? But the more that I was thinking about it is every time there's an escalation, it's prompted by Slim asking a question of the police officer. And now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that Slim should not have, I'm not putting any, like Slim was asking perfectly reasonable questions, like, why do I have to get out of the car? Why do you have to look in my trunk? How long is this going to take? I'm feeling cold, laughing out of nerves over being asked to have a drink. But every time Slim initiates, it pushes the cop. And I guess it's because the cop feels like as soon as Slim is in any way expecting to be treated like a person, that is kind of aggravating the cop's intentions here, where he wants to make Slim not feel like a person.
Yeah.
And so the cop escalates every time Slim acts like he's a normal person with normal rights, who wants to be treated with dignity and respect.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tense scene, and I agree with you. It is definitely, it starts with very plot light, and this is why I want to include it. It's plot light about character, right?
Yeah.
So the plot question of will they go home, and then there is an addition of another character that changes the question. It's got unity of time and unity of space, but the unity of action changes.
So it goes from being a character scene to being a plot scene.
But I think it's interesting because it's definitely, you feel a plot, but I definitely think because we're at an early stage of the film, I don't know if you had this feeling, but part of it is you don't know how these characters are going to act in this situation, right? 100%. So there is character questions. How are they going to handle themselves?
Yeah.
Right. So
who are these people in the face of this extreme pressure?
And because it's Queen at the end, Queenie, who is like, we've got to go on the run. Right. Yeah. So it's a shift. It's a revelation of character from her. Right. So it kind of answers this question of who are these people, which literally starts on their Tinder date. So I just thought it was an interesting example of that kind of shifting from a character to a plot question. Right. And how that plot question can be raised by the introduction of another character. And that is obviously a stereotype. I mean, it's a traffic stop. a white officer with two black people.
White officer alone, importantly.
Yes.
But in the same way that in the Last Crusade scene, there was a character scene and then the plot
intervened.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that word because there's a difference between the plot intervening and there's a plot question that is kind of answered. It's like the question is thrusted into your face or rears its ugly head. And we have no reason, like as soon as those lights flash, I guess, with the question is raised, though there is this moment about them kind of fighting over the phone in the car and we see it wiggle and it's kind of amusing, but also you know enough to be like, this can't necessarily go well. I don't know. Maybe I'm just conscious of it because they introduced more stricter controls around scroll. Apparently we in Melbourne, we can't scroll on our phones even if they're mounted in the car. Like page turning is okay, but scrolling?
So just to give an example, right? In the Last Crusade, they could have, because the character scene led into plot exposition, like Henry Jones Sr. was talking about the tests that they're going to go through, and they could have then cut to being in the Middle East, right? That could have been a segue into that next sequence. But this is an Indiana Jones movie, and you got to have a fucking plane escape, right?
Yeah.
Right, so they just needed the plot to intervene for pacing reasons. Now this, like you said, the plot intervenes because it's the inciting incident of the whole story. But I think on a micro level, like when we were doing our antagonist series, and we were looking at how it's different when you can't negotiate with the antagonist, like particularly nature antagonists, right? You can't sit down and bargain with a wolf or a shark or a tidal wave or a tornado. And that's what this felt like, right?
The power imbalance is so extreme that he can't do anything.
Yeah.
But whatever he does is going to escalate the situation.
And it's interesting to me that he changes tactics. Like, Slim is like trying to say, recognize me as a human being, that I'm okay, that I have rights, that I have dignity, treat me like a normal person, until the cop pulls the gun. And then he's like, just do what he says, get back in the car. Like, then he's immediately, he changes his tactic, whereas the cop pulling the gun escalates Queen's tactics. She then gets out of the car. She then intervenes. She says, I'm reaching for my cell phone. I'm an attorney,
Yeah, that's a great analysis. And it is an example of that kind of midpoint shift within a scene, right? So the larger scene structure and the location of there's a date, the cop arrives is kind of like a midpoint to that. But the cop drawing his gun, yes, it escalates the scene, but it's definitely a turn within the scene. And then that raises a new question of, will the gun go off? Will someone get shot? And the answer is yes. And the answer to that question, which is, yes, someone got shot, it was the cop, is like, what now? Right?
Yeah.
What happens now? And then they decide to go on the run. And then the question becomes, how long can they keep this up? And the answer is not long. No.
I have not seen this film. I only saw the opening for this.
It's good. It's tough. I mean, it's got some great moments, because in the end, it's this. They've done it kind of feels like a little bit of like that Bonnie and Clyde kind of like Crims on the Run romance, but from modern age, because it comes from a Tinder date, like them beginning to kind of like fall for each other. But I think they've done a good job of like, there's enough chemistry with them in the car that you're like, yeah, maybe it isn't going great, but in other circumstances, I don't know. It's great. Speaking of kind of stuff that is dealing with like race issues, I want to do a scene from Do the Right Thing, because we haven't done a theme scene yet. We've done a lot of plot and we've done a lot of character. And Do the Right Thing is an incredibly thematic film that actually plays a lot with film form and breaking the fourth wall and stuff like that, which is in this moment that you'll see. Have you seen Do the Right Thing?
I have not. Like, I realized just by playing Framed recently that my African-American shame list is disproportionately large. There are so many classics of African-American cinema that I just have not seen.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen a lot of Spike Lee films, but I haven't seen fucking Do the Right Thing. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I sadly haven't seen that many of Spike Lee things. And it was one of my friend Kush who made me watch Do the Right Thing, because he was connected more to the hip hop scene and stuff like that. So his kind of like interest in African-American cinema was quite high. Anyway, I think it's like coming into this with no context is better, right? So essentially, you've got two characters in this scene, Radio Raheem and Mookie. Radio Raheem is the character with the beatbox, which you can probably hear. And he's got these kind of like, you wouldn't call them grills, but like knuckle dusters, basically, one with love and hate. And then Mookie is just a pizza delivery guy for Sal's Pizzeria. And so they cross in the street and have this interaction.
Raheem! Move! China.
World.
Where you headed to?
I'm going to get a slice.
You going down to Sal's?
Word.
I gotta make you deliveries and I'll check you back there, right?
On the rebound.
Bet. All right. Oh, shit. Let me check it out. That's the hype.
Newest, latest. Let me tell you the story of right hand, left hand. It's a tale of good and evil. Hey, it was with this hand that Cain iced his brother. Love. These 5 fingers, they go straight to the soul of man. The right hand, the hand of love. The story of life is this. Static. One hand is always fighting the other hand. And the left hand is kicking much ass. I mean, it looks like the right hand love is finished. But hold on, stop the presses, the right hand's coming back. Yeah, he got the left hand on the ropes now, that's right. Yeah, ooh, it's a devastating right and hate is hurt. He's down. Ooh, left hand hate KO'd by love. If I love you, I love you. But if I hate you,
there it is, love and hate.
I love you, bro.
Bet. Read Raheem, check you later. Peace.
And did you see this as thematic? I put this in thematic because I'm like, I don't know what the plot question is. Is the plot question will Mookie get back to Sal's? Will he deliver the pizza in time?
Having watched this in complete isolation, and I just want to reiterate what you and I define as being a thematic question. A thematic question to me is prompting the audience to go, why am I watching this? Right? So you're generally not learning necessarily anything about the characters or you're not answering who is this character internally or what do they want, and you're not asking any plot questions. And I think you're absolutely right. There's definitely no plot question posed. Like, they just meet in the street and start having a chat, and Mookie notices the new knuckle dusters, and then that wonderful scene comes from it. And I love how Radio Raheem kind of drifts off at the end, going like, he's been inspired to like have this whole statement about love and hate and you know how it relates to boxing and life, and then he's kind of like, but where do I sit in all of this, right? So I think there's definitely a character question posed in there. And because I watched it out of context, if I had met Radio Raheem earlier in the film, and I don't know if I have, and I know who he is, then this would feel more thematic to me than if he's being introduced in this scene, because then I'm going, who is this guy? Is this... Do you see what I mean? Like
I do. But I actually think as preparation of this episode, re-listened to our Arguments of the Scene episode, right? And that was about how we talked a lot about worldview and characters' worldview and the theme coming through how the characters perceive the world. I think this is a great example of kind of a character theme scene, right? That ultimately theme is probably going to be emerging from your characters. So as we're asking questions about our characters, we're asking questions about theme, right? I think it'd be interesting to see if you can do, I mean, maybe the example we did from Apocalypse Now with Stephen Cleary in our Thematic Sequences episode is more pure theme because it's not about the characters. But here, when we're talking about a film that is ultimately about racial politics and racial violence, right, it is going to be connected to characters. Like on this level, they've done it on a neighborhood level. It could be about institutionalized brutality, right? Yeah. Like, I guess maybe Detroit is that which you haven't seen either. But, you know, is it African-American cinema given it's a right and a right white director. I don't know. It's still a really good film. So I think that's why I wanted to play this. I think it's kind of an example of this. I don't think you need to be taxonomical in terms of I'm doing a character scene or I'm doing a theme scene. But the question is, when does the audience raise the question themselves?
Yeah.
When do they have that moment? Yeah.
I do think this is one of those examples where this is not a purely writing thing, like the
directing,
execution and the directing and the cinematography also controls these questions. Because when we first meet Raheem, I think the question is a pure character question. Who is Raheem, right? And then he starts on this incredible monologue, and you're like, okay, this is kind of who Raheem is. But because the camera is so square on to him, and the love and hate take up so much of the frame when they come out, it becomes less about Raheem and what he's talking about, until, like I said, you get to that point at the end where Raheem kind of drifts off a little bit and is uncertain as to where he sits in this whole world view. Then it becomes a little bit, then the question for me then became a character question of how does Raheem sit in his own worldview that he's just espoused. So I think it does. I think it starts off with a character question, deliberately moves us into, why are we watching this? What is this saying about everything else? What is Spike Lee as a writer-director trying to tell us in this moment? And then goes back into who Raheem is.
Yeah, look, I think the directing helps raise that question, right? So yes, it goes from like a two-shot profile. So you see Mookie and Radio Raheem, and then the camera, unmotivated by action. So it's very like our point of view, rotates 90 degrees. So Radio Raheem is speaking right at camera. And as much as you're saying that he's directing, a writer could imply, like have a moment, Radio Raheem, to camera, like breaking the fourth wall, to indicate that is the point that the character needs, that the audience needs to ask the question of like, holy shit, why are they talking at me? And that is an observation you're making about Promising Young Woman, about the kind of like Interrotron, down the barrel, almost documentary style of the way they shot some of those scenes, because it's about you being confronted by what these characters are saying. And so that is something I don't know. I should check in Promising Young Woman whether she actually called that out in the script, but it's definitely meant to be that, you know, unsurprisingly, the directing of writing is about supporting the writing.
For sure. And look, if I were, this is purely subjective, and there's no way I can do the right thing. But if I was going to now write, this is going to be two cameras straight down the barrel, I would almost say before the monologue, I even get into it, why I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I would say this character is talking straight to us as the audience, basically trying to, in words, say the effect that the directing and the cinematography achieves.
I think that would actually be, if anything, is like tips and tricks. I completely agree. I would probably do the same thing, because you don't want someone going, why are you doing this? You actually want the reader to be like, I understand. Oh, I'm smart. I know why you're doing this. It's just an example of interesting patterning that we've noticed before, is we now follow Radio Raheem into Sal's Pizzeria, right? And Sal's Pizzeria, the conflict with Sal's Pizzeria is kind of what ends up defining much of the film, particularly the riot at the end. So we've gone from something that is like character theme to a scene where Radio Raheem comes into a pizzeria. Sal demands that Radio Raheem turns off his beatbox, and Radio Raheem is initially resistant, right? And there is a lot of pre-existing racial tension between these. That's been the kind of the build-up. Radio Raheem ultimately gives in and then orders his pizza, and Sal's like, oh yeah, so there's a very clear plot. It's a very quick plot question. It's just a good example of modulation, right? That you've had a scene that's character theme, that we've gone, and then we've seen a scene that is thematically connected, right? Between like the tension between Sal and Radio Raheem, but it's it's plot based. It's just a very simple plot. Will Radio Raheem turn off his beatbox, and will he order his pizza?
Yeah.
Fight the power. We got to fight the powers that be.
Two slices. No service till you turn that shit off.
2 slices.
Turn it off. Mr. Radio Raheem, I can't even hear myself think. You are disturbing me. You are disturbing my customers!
Fight the power! Fight the power! Fight the power!
Two slices.
You come into Sal's, there's no music. No rap, no music, no music, no music. Capiche? Understand?
Yo, put some extra mozzarella on that motherfucker and shit.
Extra cheese is $2.
The fact that they're playing Fight the Power and the power is trying to turn the music off is, so loaded. But
yeah,
but you're right. Like, hopefully, just by going into that scene, and again, so if we're going to do key learnings and wrap ups, I think what we could try and do is like, what did observing that, you can basically control character questions of a spectrum from at their most quote unquote narrative or dramatic plot questions to their most, I guess, esoteric or abstract thematic questions, with character being somewhere in the middle there. What does being in control of those, when the audience is asking those questions, give to the writer?
Yeah. I would say that I would look through scenes, and look, we're about to do a. Sorry, the cat is. She wants the thing is, she wants a lap, and she's pissed off that she can't sit on my lap while I'm at the desk. I'm so scared.
And this is Stu in the face of an antagonist that he can't negotiate with.
And the thing is, maybe like, I don't know. She doesn't bitch slap Emma, so
he's tried bribery and that has failed.
that is definitely well. She just took the bribe and came back. Thanks. I still want a lap. Okay, I think if you're looking at a scene, I would start. I think, to me, like, going, when does the audience know to, and what question do I want the audience to be asking that creates the suspense, the reason to watch this scene, right? Like, there is a reason this is here, and it's because you want to hold them in thrall. And look, if you're we're talking about stuff that is dramatic, not imagistic or poetic or some other kind of mode of filmmaking, right? But I like these questions. I talk about like someone like Stan Brakhage a lot. I'm not going to watch Stan Brakhage for 2 hours. I'm lucky to watch like 2 minutes of Stan Brakhage, right? Because it just doesn't hold my attention. And we're talking about like suspense, I guess, is holding your attention, right? But
even something like Stalker, that just becomes very thematic.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're just kind of sitting back and letting it wash over us and going, like, exploring our own feelings and reactions to the art rather than going, what's happening?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think being in control of when the audience knows to answer the question and knowing who your audience is. Loki is aimed at a younger audience. So the fact is, its questions are going to be more explicit, right? So you can follow what's going on. Look, it's just slightly related, but I actually think one of the genius things of Andor is because it's episodic, it has catch-ups every 30 minutes in a spy thriller telling you what's going on. And you can skip them, but it basically it just reassures you're following the threads of the story, right? Whereas I think, you don't get something like that in Zodiac or Mindhunter. And actually, it's unrelated, but actually, no, it's not unrelated because it helps you answer. Oh, bloody hell, come on.
She just bitch slapped
again. Oh my God. Oh God.
We have it on tape.
I have it on so much tape. Those those catch-ups, those replays help the audience. What they are is controlling the audiences, the questions the audience are going to ask. Questions the audience are going to ask during the episode, right?
Well, yeah, and just to go back to Loki, and this also is, I think, if you're engaging in any kind of, like you say, sort of narrative storytelling that is not sort of imagistic or poetical, then if you're showing something on screen, the audience is going to be asking questions. They're going to be asking primarily, why am I watching this in any given scene? At the beginning of the scene, like Stephen Cleary always reminds us that when you go into a new scene, the audience starts asking like a series of questions to orient themselves. Where am I? Who's here? Why am I watching this? Right. And, that you talked about those transitions from scene to scene. So there's the questions are happening whether you're in control of them or not. Right, is the broad point. That is how we interact with art. But the thing that I really liked about Loki is I think there's a difference between a scene posing a question and when it gets resolved. We've looked at discrete scenes to kind of prove this point, but the first episode of Loki is basically Loki has got no fucking clue what's going on.
Yeah.
And often it's just question after question. Like, we're trying to understand the rules of this world. What's Loki's power? Where is he? Why are they doing this? Who's Owen Wilson? It's deliberately, that first episode, I loved it a lot. The first episode, I like it more than the plottier episodes of Loki. It felt almost like 1984 or Kafka, because it was deliberately not answering questions. It was just asking question after question after question. So there's the thing that I've taken from this, and the reason we're doing this topic is because we're about to dive into a rewrite where, Stu, you've finished the pass. I'm following you, polishing the pass, but we've got too many pages, which we know this was a deliberate choice. We wanted to add all this stuff that we've been getting from feedback. And now we're going to go back through it and focus on pacing. And in our focusing on pacing, we are essentially going to be asking, like you said, what is the question of each of those scenes? When are we raising it? Can we, come in later? Can we leave earlier? Is this, when we've resolved that question and we've got a new question raised, do we want to do that in a different scene? Do we want that whole beat at all?
Yeah, so it can be, because you might have a moment where almost like in the larger structures where you resolve the plot question and you just got space for a character question at the end.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That is asked or answered. You got a space for that, or you got space for theme at the end of a scene, and finally she's sitting on my lap.
Don't talk, bitch.
Yeah, I think she doesn't want me talking. Yeah, so it's interesting, though, that, when is it, there are spaces when you resolve plot questions that you could probably just sustain a moment, if not longer, of character or theme. And look, to me, a revelation of this stuff of, plot, character, that is no surprise that character and plot are interrelated, but the interrelationship between character and theme during this episode and going, yeah, you probably are going to more often have scenes or moments within scenes that are about the interrelationship of character and theme than you are something that is purely thematic.
Yeah.
It'd be like, maybe someone's going to find it a purely thematic scene and maybe it's going to be something from like 2001 and they're going to drop that in as the example and maybe that's what it is, something like that. But I think that's going to feel something more, it's going to feel more intellectual than emotional in terms of what the theme is.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference because we're talking about controlling the questions that the audience is asking, right? And we've done an episode on character worldview, right? And obviously, every single character's worldview, you've chosen these characters, you've chosen what they think and how they experience about the world, and that is going to be somewhat reflective, hopefully in contrasting ways, of what your whole story is about, right? So it's quite possible that you could look at that Radio Raheem scene as this is just a character talking about his worldview, and it's only posing the character question of how does Raheem see the world? Right? And without it being thematic. Now, I think in this particular instance, they've made it thematic through the performance of it. So, these are choices that you can make as a writer. Like, do you want the audience engaging more deeply with Raheem or with what Raheem is saying?
I mean, coming back to our choices and decision episode, the presentation of the choice and the character making a decision is the character and the audience being aligned in terms of what the question is. Literally, the presentation of the choice is what will the character choose? Will they, go away? Will they go after their friend or will they save themselves? you know, and that is plot character. So I think you'll start to see these patterning throughout. And there are choices, as you say, but it's also like what you're choosing to show the audience. I think the Bourne example, which we talked to depth, but still struck me how good that is, that they have structured it in such a way to make that character, I mean, it's Gilroy, right? I mean, genius, but like it is structured in such a way to make that hit really hard. Peter Greengrass is directing, emphasizing that, but that moment of like, so we're kind of in her moment. It's got a bit of plot, but it goes into character, like all that stuff. There's a lot of things to make that work and make you sit in with that, but they've done it. And that's why it's in the middle of an action film. Whereas, you know, Fast and the Furious ain't going to have shit like that. That is for sure. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be like family. Will he choose family?
Well, to go back to Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, there is no thematic question posed at any of that point, but that's not to say that all those plot character questions don't build up to a meaning at the end, right?
Yeah.
I was so expertly manipulated by that film. Like, the closing dramatic question of, you know, will he save his wife or will he save the actual, you know, pragmatic mother for his daughter, is that dramatized choice that, you know, made me cry and well up with tears. But then ultimately that is the question posed by the whole movie, right? What are you prepared to do for those you love?
Bitch slap them in the face until they give you enough space in a lap. She's very reluctantly on my lap, by the way. This would be a lot more comfortable if you were on the couch, Stu.
I guess the final observation, and it's one that I've made throughout, but I just want to repeat it, is like, if you're wanting to have, you know, slow down the pace of your film, dive into either a character question or a thematic question, the effort that in each of those scenes they had to go to give space for that is quite important. So I think you have to understand that audiences, I feel, in most film and TV as an art form, are looking for plot questions. Yeah. And you're going to have to take those off the table.
They have the most urgency, right? Like we talked about goal, stakes, and urgency before. And I think they're related. Like the stuff that we've been saying as light plot questions really don't either have stakes or don't really have urgency, or maybe a little bit of both, right? So there's a goal. And so the question is, will they achieve their goal? But it's not like, oh my God, there's a bomb, or oh my God, the Nazis are watching them, you know, from afar, which is not what happens. They specifically take that out, you know, or in the case of Loki, they're going to be able to get off the planet before it dies. Like the urgency of that makes the question just drive the audience, and it pulls their attention. We're all ADHD in some little ways, Chaz.
Well, yes, and I keep banging on about this, and I probably sound like a broken record, but I just feel like we're so much more story and cinema literate as an audience. So these things keep having to speed up because we are processing story so much faster. And because of that, you know, to have these moments that stick out, you've got to actually do a bit of work to stop, to reorient the audience and go, actually, no, just sit for a moment. And, you know, like your observation in the Nesky scene that they chose to have a follow shot of her.
To come into the scene. Like, where do you begin the scene? How do you open the scene? Where do you start? You don't actually start with him there. You start with her coming in, because that's when we raise the question of that she feels under threat.
But it's to put us as the audience in her point of view deliberately, right? So we are asking character questions. Who is this? Why are we following her? You know, plot relations. Who is she in relation to Jason Bourne? But they're very carefully kind of balancing in that mystery, but also empathy, like in the character work, in the scene work, in all the choices there to lead into that moment.
Yeah, so I think part of your, like, the final question mark question is, like, when you're thinking about the question and when it is raised, maybe it's worth thinking about from whose point of view. It can be an omniscient audience point of view, right? But it could also be from a character point of view, and it may not be your primary character. Yeah. You know, in a way, she's almost the protagonist of the scene. She is the one that is turned up, and he's kind of the antagonist, at least momentarily. But maybe that analysis kind of doesn't matter, but they made a good choice to make that scene stronger. All right. Well, that was a good chop.
It was. Can I just potentially derail it and just ask you, who do you think that there are scenes in narrative storytelling that don't raise a character question at all? Or any question, plot, character, thing, just don't have a question.
In narrative cinema?
Yeah.
I mean, other than like title scene sequences, no, you could probably have moments of pure kind of like aesthetic in a broad sense, like pleasure, but I'm struggling to think of something that is not nested in the same way that we've talked about, right? You might have a moment with a great bit of music or a great bit of song that's kind of like visually spectacular. I'm thinking of like the barn raising scene in Witness, but that is actually them. Will they build the barn? And it's actually full of character, right?
Yeah, but I guess that is focusing on audience experience, right? To that point, potentially experiential is a separate thing. Like I think in certain martial art films, obviously there's the plot question of who's going to defeat who. But at a certain point, they can just become like reveling in the choreography and potentially the brutality of what you're seeing or doing. I think there's something in there where it's not actually questions and more about emotion or feeling.
Yeah, I mean, you might get beats of that, like with horror, where there's like the discovery of the dead body, or the actual after the body has died, like the reveling and the gore. And I'm sure there's probably moments within other kinds of films, like sex scenes, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I doubt most sex scenes are going to have the question of like, will they come? It's not an active plot question. Maybe it reveals a bit of character, but mostly it's us enjoying the answer of when will they get together, and we sit within the answer, right? I don't think as much as the scene between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor does actually move the plot forward, quite literally, and backward.
So like just when I'd asked this question in the pre-chat, you were talking about the metal scene at the end of A New Hope, and that's because there are no questions posed anymore, and we are just enjoying their success. We are like just purely in the moment with them. But I contrast that within The Mood for Love when he's walked away from the temple and we're just hanging in the temple. That to me is very thematic. It's not experiential.
No. But it's not character theme. Maybe it is character theme, but it feels more just purely theme. So yeah, there's some stuff in there that kind of, because I think quote unquote, Emmett has complained about our use of quote unquote. So I think dramatic cinema you don't have to stay in drama. You can drop out of being in drama. You can be imagistic or poetic or experiential at certain moments. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about. But they're usually used at kind of often, in the case of In the Mood for Love, it's the end of the film.
Yeah. The questions have largely resolved, other than the key one of why have I been watching this?
Yeah.
So yeah, the only reason why I raised that is because I think sometimes we get a bit too hung up on these tools and, think that they're exhaustive and complete and the only lens through which you can see something. And I just...
Yeah. I mean, coming back to our rewrite, there's moments where I want to be like a cinematic pass where I'm like literally going through and going, is there a way we can do these moments without dialogue at all? Can we push it into imagery? And if we're pushing it into imagery, how do we then write that on the page? But that's a separate question.
Thanks to all our patrons who bring you more Draft Zero more often, and in particular the Superist patrons who... Lord knows why they want this much Draft Zero this often, but...
Is that a plot character question, a plot character theme question, a character theme question? I think it's character theme. I think it's a character theme question.
Special thanks to Alexandra, Casimir, Eduardo, Jen, Thomas, Garrett, Randy, Jesse, Sandra, Thies, Alex, and Krob.
We love you all.
Yes, all of you. Like... top patrons, dollar patrons, all in between. Thank you for you do motivate us as much as we're still infrequent we would be more infrequent without your support.
All right. Well, I actually thought that went pretty well. I don't think it was too lectury.
I hope you all feel like arguing with either Stu or myself
about anything on this episode or anything in general.
And you can find many ways of getting in touch with us at our website at draft-zero.com.
At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes,
as well as links to support us and spread the word for free via a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Very important for spreading the word.
Or if you think that what we do here is worth $1 or preferably more than $1, then you can also find links to our Patreon page to support us getting these episodes to you quicker. Thanks.
And thanks for listening.
And now for Back Matter.